Hello and welcome to my art lair. My name is Natalie, aka Nat Archaic Cosplay, or Archaic Costumes is my business on Etsy. I just recently finished a pattern for my Legend of Zelda Hylian shield, and it's all EVA foam, and the purpose of this tutorial is going to be how to walk through everything from putting together the pattern all the way through tracing, cutting out pieces, assembling the pieces, priming, sealing, painting, etc. So I'll be walking through, again, it's all in the instructions, but I will be kind of walking through side by side with you with this video to show you how to make your own shield. A ruler for straight edges, pair of scissors, tiny little beads for like the rivets and the designs, tape for taping together the pattern pieces, heat gun for sealing, Dremel for different shapes, soldering iron for detailed wood grain. You'll want your protective gear for your ventilation and protecting your eyes. Of course, contact cement. I prefer weldwood. That's how you're going to glue together the pieces. E6000 for gluing on little details. One of my favorites is a silver marker for drawing on the pieces onto the foam. One of my newest additions is this tool for the contact cement. It's actually a brush that is reusable, so you don't have to throw it away when you're done, and it peels right off the silicone. And then of course you'll need your X-Acto knife for cutting. Make sure you have plenty of blades so they're sharp. And then I like to use sewing pins for attaching the pattern pieces to my foam to keep them in place while I trace. And then lastly, puff paint for some of the detail. Print out all the pattern pieces, ideally one-sided, well, definitely one-sided, ideally in color. That way you can see the different markings of like gray, black, red, blue, because those will have different instructions. This picture, and it shows all of the pieces and what the whole thing's supposed to look like when you've fully assembled all the pieces. So to assemble the pieces, you will follow along the edges in red. There will be double letters, so like A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D. And along the edge of some of the pieces, you'll see like a black dotted line. That will go underneath the sheet next to it. So you'll just kind of line those up. I already did a first few couple pages, and you'll kind of see where they line up. Solid black lines mean cut. That's your cut line. Anything that's a dotted black line is sort of like that's where something's going to get glued or placed. Or in the case of the pattern pieces, it was where to attach. Anything that's a gray dotted line means you're also going to glue something there. So one of the first shield pieces, you'll see a lot of different dotted lines, and that's the locations of where you're going to glue pieces. And then for the wood grain, if you see a solid gray line, and this is optional, you know, if you don't want to decorate the back, that's fine. If you do want to go a little above and beyond for a piece that most people will never see, the wood grain is there in case you would like to use that. And then the only other solid gray line is on the front of the frame, on the front of the shield, and that's where the puff paint goes for detail. And again, there's some also in the first one. You could do puff paint if you like for some of this detail, if you want it to be more 3D, but if you would like for it to sink more in, I used a wood burning tool for some of these details on the outside. Oh, and then lastly, for these sort of three-dimensional pieces, you'll cut these out in 10 millimeter EVA foam. And the hash line means that's where you take the Dremel and you'll kind of sort of bevel it, so to kind of give it that 3D shape. And the black dots in this case are sort of where you want to draw your marker lines, and then that's the point at which you don't want to touch, and all points come up to that on both sides. So kind of you'll kind of have like a triangle effect on either side of this black line down the middle all the way through. And same with the little piece there. And they're all numbered, so there should be a total of 17 pieces. And they say on them how many to cut. And most of them are one. A lot of them, even if it's one, there is a mirrored flip. So one thing that you'll see here in the case of the big shield pieces, instead of having you cut out more paper, it'll say there'll be like an arrow, and it'll say flip and mirror. So what that means is when you go to trace it on the foam, you'll trace one side and then you'll mirror flip it and you'll trace the other side around. And like I said, the majority of the pieces, it's just the biggest pieces. There are some where if it says cut to, you'll want the opposite shape, so you'll trace this one and then you would flip it over and trace the other and have that cut out. In this case, if the foam is smooth on both sides, it really doesn't matter because you can flip it over anyway. Yeah, and same with these, these decorative pieces. You'll want to trace one side, cut it out, and then flip it and have the mirror image for the cut to there. These will all be done in 2mm foam. That's the thinnest one that you usually find at the craft store that they have on hand. I've taped down the edges. You don't have to do that. My roll, I had a big roll and it was curved. I like to stick pins in it just because when you have very detailed skinny pieces, it's hard to kind of hold them and trace them. Ones like this aren't as hard, but some of these really long skinny ones, you just want to make sure you trace them evenly. So I stick pins in them, and then I take my silver marker and I trace around. So now the pieces I told you that have sort of a mirror effect, after you trace one side, you'll want to, as you can see here, I traced the foot of the bird there. So that was the left side, right side up. You want to flip it over, and then that's what you're going to want to trace, right? Same with this wing over here. You're going to do 2 of those, and one is going to be sort of a mirrored effect. And another thing too is all of these pieces are mostly left side pieces, with the exception of the back shield with the wood grain. Everything is a left side piece. So, as you can see here, that was one side, and then we're going to flip it over and we'll trace the other side. I haven't drawn that one on yet. I'm going to move that a little bit. So this one fits just like that. And then you'll trace those. And another thing is when you go to cut these out, I'm not the best tracer, so some of my lines are kind of thick. When you go to trace this, you're going to want to cut on the innermost edge. You don't want to cut on the outside of your marker. You want to cut right on the inside because that's going to be the true shape. For the front shield frame, that's the more decorative one that's got that has the detail along the outside. I try to use as many scrap pieces as possible. One, because I just have a lot of random foam lingering around, but and then an environment. So I have, instead of being able to cut this in one whole piece and mirror flip it like it calls for, if you have one full sheet, great, do it. Do one full piece that's seamless. It does require, if you do multiple pieces and you're try to be a perfectionist like me, you don't want seams, so the more that you piece and you glue together, the more seams you'll have. So that's just one caveat there, but you can see here that I've mirrored it like this. So I've got one line here. So I tried to do the line where it wouldn't be as noticeable, so that won't be too bad right there. I might need to Dremel it or fill it a little bit, but that's not too bad. And then I've got my other piece right here, and it goes like that. So I have 4 total pieces here that I will be gluing together, here, 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 and here. And then after I assemble all of this, I will attach this to the front of my shield. Another thing I'll mention too, I got a little lazy this time around. Make sure your X-Acto knife is very, very sharp. I got some pretty good lines here. This is all really clean, but on my second side there's a little bit of the fuzzies. That's what I call them, the fuzzies. When you use the heat gun, some of that kind of shrinks up, so it won't be that bad. But another thing too, this is some really cheap scrap foam that I had left over that I just randomly got off Amazon. It's the floor mats that have the texture on the bottom. I try to buy, there's several retailers out there. One I really like is Cosplay Crafts. In particular, one, there's pros and cons for every shop. One thing I really like about them is their shipping is not really expensive, and they ship things to you really quickly too. So, but when you buy the nicer foam, it tends to cut more like butter. I mean, it's really good quality foam. So just keep that in mind. You know, if you buy the really cheap stuff, you might be saving money on the front end, but time, if you do care about making sure everything's really smooth, on the back end you will spend more time trying to clean some stuff up. So that's just kind of a trade-off there. But yeah, actually a lot of the foam that I'm using here is cosplay craft foam. This just so happens to be some just extra scrap I've had for a couple years now I'm trying to use on this project. There's a couple things that I didn't know that I made mistakes on when I was first creating armor. And one of those is the difference between contact cement and other types of glue. Make sure if you're using any sort of cement, it's contact cement. Anything else, rubber cement, will peel apart. That's really good for scrapbooking, not EVA foam. It will not stick. Secondly, you want to make sure that when you are kind of painting the glue on, you're doing it really thin. You don't, well, not too thick, just enough so that way after you paint it on and it's shiny, it dries and it turns matte, and then that's when you want to stick it together. If you do it too soon, it will not stay together. I made that mistake and didn't understand why my pieces weren't staying together. It's that you have to, when you brush it on, you have to kind of like let it dry. And then that's, so I just painted this a minute ago, and it looks pretty dry to me. It's not shiny anymore. And then you want to slowly line the pieces up and then smush together. Whoop. And make sure you get every inch of it too, because you don't want any little gaps. Any gaps that you have, you'll need to go back over with the bathtub caulking stuff or some type of filler to make sure it's really smooth. And you can see there, because I decided to do this in 4 different pieces, I do have a little bit of a line there. I will have a little button piece going here, but that is something I'll need to smooth out so that way it looks really smooth. But as you can see there, once you get it on, once you let that dry, it's not budging. So make sure it's exactly where you want it. Another thing, this is the first time I'm using this one. I talked about it in the intro, but this is a brush, and a lot of the materials, if you see me using things, I have this in my Amazon shop, so you can see the tools that I recommend and the materials I recommend. This is really neat because when you, normally any kind of brush you use, whether it's a sponge, you don't want to use a nice paintbrush with contact cement, but I've seen people also put them in like the ketchup squeeze-it bottles. I've done that too. But there's usually a lot of waste with contact cement and brushes. I mean, once you use it and it dries, you have to throw it away. So I saw this really neat brush in a Facebook community for cosplay creations, and this one's really nice because after you use it, it dries, it just peels right off. So you can continue to reuse. I decided to go a little thinner than what I did last time. I did 3 layers of 10 millimeter. I did the back frame, the main piece, and the front frame. It's a little thick for my taste. So this time I decided to do 6/6, and the front piece I'll do 10 millimeters still, because I still do like how far it stuck out. The back, it doesn't really matter so much, in the sandwich piece, because there are several layers of detail, it has some stability in the front frame, so it should be fine. And then instead of 2 millimeters for the back piece like I had done for the other, because sometimes when you buy 10 millimeter, depending on the vendor, you'll have like a textured side. So to cover that up, because I wanted to do the wood grain, I did a 2 millimeter on the last one. So for this one, I decided to go ahead and do 6. So I will have 12 for the middle piece, 10 for the front, 6 for the back. If you really want and you're really detail oriented, you can take an X-Acto knife and kind of cut out like main pieces to get them exactly where you want. I'm a little on the lazy side, so I am just going to line this up and then kind of like lift some pieces and kind of just draw about where they are. Like I said, it's not, you don't have to be super precise. Once you start laying out all the pieces, you'll start to figure out where they go. Especially once you get the frame on. So you can start doing that. It doesn't have to look super pretty. But yeah, once you get the frame on the outside, there's only so many places the pieces can go. So once you get, the middle line going, and then you get the other pieces lined up, they're stacked right on top of one another, the other pieces, you just can kind of eyeball it and figure out where they fit in. One thing you do want to do though is you do want to draw the general outline of where you think you're going to put the piece and trace it, because that's where you're going to want to put your contact cement on both sides, the piece that's going on it and on the mat. And then once that dries, then you'll know exactly where to put it. So that, you know, because for anyone who's worked with EVA foam before, once you glue the pieces, they are really difficult to get up, and sometimes they'll rip. So you just want to make sure, you know, you get it on your first shot where exactly you want it to go. So the next step will be kind of, you know, drawing on the front piece, the outline of all these pieces. You cut out the frame. You use contact cement along the perimeter where you drew in the lines where the frame goes. You put it on both sides, both on the base and underneath the front frame. And then after it dries, you attach it. So I've done that here. So it's curving up a little bit still because, like I said, the original pieces were rolled up in the mail. So one of the things that you want to do, I actually put contact cement along the pentagon shape. And on the pattern, there's a T and a B. It's for top and bottom. It's not a perfect aligned pentagon, so just make sure that the T is what goes at the very, very top, and the B is what goes at the bottom. Like that. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you put down the outside is if it doesn't align perfectly, that's okay. I didn't in a few spots. When you get the Dremel at the very end, you can try and Dremel that out. If there's a little excess or doesn't fit just right, you know, you can trim the circle just a little bit smaller. You'll glue that. Well, first you want to trace it. And I'm pretty close from where I drew the initial trace. Just make sure that's in the middle. It's okay if it's a little bit off. The biggest thing is you just want everything to look symmetrical. This one looks like it's going to be a little lower than what I drew. That's okay. Just make sure you align all the other pieces around this main triangle frame.